Hey, what's good, self-direct investors? I hope you're all doing great, and I want to welcome you back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jordan. I'm the mind behind Make More Capital, and today we're coming at you with This Week in Cannabis News from November 1st to the 7th. So before we jump in, if you enjoy this video or you learned something, please just leave a like on it as it really helps out my channel. And of course, if you want to learn how to take advantage of this generational investment opportunity, subscribe below so that you don't miss any future videos, and there's plenty of content for you to go back, rewatch, and educate yourself with. I've tried to put all the news and facts in one place so you can watch episodes over time to learn about the evolution of the industry, identify top companies that you keep seeing pop up, and take advantage whenever you're ready. And we've been waiting for some sort of a catalyst, like possibly the Dems keeping their promise and doing their job, but for some reason they haven't been able to do that. But we did get something that was even better than that on Friday, and for that reason we did see the highest volume day ever. And this is a screenshot shared by Weed Street 420. Now, I'm a little bit hesitant on calling bottom, but obviously this is what we want to see. Just rather let next week play out before I get too excited. However, it's worth clarifying that I believe when he refers to highest volume day ever, it's shares traded and not dollar volume. But still, it's significant because if we actually click on the picture, historically, there's never been this much volume of shares traded, especially within the last 45 minutes of a given day, which gives us reason to be optimistic heading into next week, especially because the MSOs are also going to be starting to release their earnings after market close as of 5 p.m. with Curaleaf. Now, from a technical standpoint, which is not my forte, this is a great sign, but we're also going to need to see this follow through Monday morning as well, likely to keep the pressure on the bears from the bulls. And so since that's not my forte, I would recommend watching this video from the chart guys. Dan does a great job breaking down some of these things that you need to look for, and he does a good job explaining what we're going to need to look out for on Monday. So you can check that out. But what caused that was this news that dropped, like 30 minutes before market close on Friday. So it almost looks like it was designed to trap the bears. But Republican-led bill to legalize and tax cannabis emerges as alternative to Democratic measures. And I think this was the best news that we could have hoped for, because in my view, it's no longer if the Dems will get it done, but it has to be which party is going to get it done first. And because the Dems are already in power, this puts a lot of pressure on Schumer to keep safe in the NDAA, and it puts a lot of pressure on Biden administration to ask the DOJ to really start the descheduling process and begin descheduling the plant, because otherwise, if they don't, there's a good chance the Republicans, for showing the support, that they're going to end up sweeping the Senate and the House and get voted in 2022. So best case scenario for us investors, because it's forcing the Dems to act. A new Republican-led congressional cannabis legalization bill is imminent. Marijuana Moment has learned the measure is being framed by advocates as a compromise between simply descheduling as proposed by other GOP lawmakers and wide-ranging comprehensive legislation that Democratic leaders are championing. Marijuana Moment obtained text of the draft legislation, which is being led by Rep. Nancy Mace, a Republican from South Carolina. The measure, titled the States Reform Act, is currently being circulated among stakeholders for feedback and is therefore preliminary, but a final version is expected to be officially filed later this month. So much like Schumer's CAOA, this is just a draft bill that's been introduced. And so the freshman congresswoman, who was the sole GOP vote in favor of a cannabis research bill for veterans during a committee markup on Thursday, so it's also a Republican that just happens to see that this is a solution to a lot of problems, is aiming to federally deschedule cannabis and create a regulatory scheme, but still ensure that existing state markets are not unduly burdened or undermined by new rules. So here's a rundown of the details based on the draft legislation and summary documents obtained by Marijuana Moment. Cannabis would be federally descheduled and treated in a manner similar to alcohol. Great. A 3.75% excise tax would be imposed on cannabis sales, much better than the eventual 25% tax that the Dems would put on it. Revenue would support grant programs for community reentry, law enforcement, and small business administration aid for newly licensed businesses. Great. The Treasury Department's Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau, TTB, would be the chief regulator for cannabis with respect to interstate commerce. The Food and Drug Administration, FDA, would be limited in its regulatory authority, with the intent being that it would have no more control over cannabis than it does for alcohol, except when it comes to medical cannabis. In that case, the agency could prescribe serving sizes, certify designated state medical cannabis products, and regulate pharmaceuticals derived from cannabis, but could not ban the use of cannabis or its derivatives in non-drug applications, like in designated state medical cannabis products, dietary supplements, food beverages, non-drug topicals, or cosmetics. Raw cannabis would be considered an agricultural commodity regulated by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. The legislation would grandfather existing state licensed cannabis operators in the federal scheme to ensure continued patient access and incentivize participation in the legal market. As federal agencies work to promulgate rules, there would be a safe harbor for provisions to protect patients and cannabis businesses acting in compliance with existing state laws. That's great. The safe harbor provisions, which would protect banks likely as well. People with certain federal cannabis convictions that were non-violent would be eligible for expungements. To prevent youth use, there would be a mandatory 21 age limit for recreational cannabis, and the bill also prescribes certain restrictions on things like advertising. SBA would need to treat cannabis businesses the same as other regulated markets, like it does for alcohol companies, for example, helping remove that double standard. The measure also stipulates that veterans can't face discrimination on federal hiring due to cannabis use, and doctors with the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs would be specifically authorized to issue recommendations for medical cannabis for veterans, while federal agencies could continue to test for cannabis if they choose so, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics would be required to issue a report on Congress on the cannabis industry, which they should have already done because the Bureau of Labor Statistics currently does not include cannabis jobs because it's still federally legal and they treat it like a secondary industry, sadly. So the draft bill is 116 pages, so the details represent just a portion of what's compromised in the legislation. And again, the provisions are subject to change as the proposal is finalized ahead of its formal introduction to Congress. But this definitely heats up the situation because it does make it to which party is going to get this done first. While we know that the Biden administration can legalize cannabis without waiting for lawmakers, congressional researchers say. Although I've been saying this all along, we have learned that he can't necessarily deschedule it himself, but he can ask the DOJ to go forward with it. President Joe Biden can grant amnesty to people who have violated federal cannabis laws, congressional researchers said in a new report, adding that his administration can also move to federally legalize cannabis without waiting for lawmakers to act. The new analysis published by the Congressional Research Service on Tuesday examines the question, does the president have the power to legalize cannabis? While CRS found that the president cannot in fact deschedule cannabis unilaterally with an executive order, he might order executive agencies to consider either altering the scheduling of cannabis or changing their enforcement approach. That includes having federal officials start a process to completely remove cannabis from the Controlled Substances Act without requiring any additional action from Congress. And this is what Senators Warren and Booker called on the DOJ to do. They didn't respond whatsoever, but if Biden asks them, then they're going to have to respond. So this is, again, something that the Dems can do right now to ensure that they keep power in 2022, because, we know America wants this. And then on top of this, election fallout night for the cannabis industry. So this is worth going through because these were the preliminary elections, I'm pretty sure. So this year's off-year elections, that's what they want to call them, was a decidedly mixed bag for cannabis businesses across the country. There were a number of victories, such as failure of new cannabis tax in Colorado, but some setbacks, mostly instances where voters decided to ban recreational and medicinal cannabis sales in parts of Michigan, Montana, and Massachusetts. So too bad for their property values. But in other news, in Colorado, voters shot down a proposed statewide tax hike on adult use cannabis sales, which lost 55 to 45, which is fair because you don't need to raise the taxes. I'm sure they make enough in Colorado. Similar measure in Denver initiated. Ordinance 300 was also defeated 60% to 40. In Billings, Montana, voters rejected a ballot measure that would have allowed recreational cannabis stores within city limits, 55 to 45. So these Montana citizens likely have not learned the new data that cannabis dispensaries actually increase the property value of where you live. So that's actually a good thing if you look at it from a certain lens. But local taxes on both recreational and medicinal cannabis were approved by Yellowstone County voters, Billings TV station reported. While in Michigan, the city of Lapeer went in the opposite direction, with voters approving a ballot measure to allow recreational shops within city limits. Smart of them, MLive.com reported, but the suburb of Clawson voted down a similar measure prohibiting adult use sales. In Massachusetts, the town of Methuen rejected a ballot measure that would have legalized recreational cannabis businesses, including retailers, growers, and transportation. That measure lost 57 to 43, so unfortunate for people looking for new opportunity in that town. Philadelphia voters easily approved a symbolic resolution supporting full cannabis legalization, 73 to 21. This was the big one. This one I reported on Wednesday as well. While this was big in Virginia, where GOP candidate Glenn Youngkin beat Democratic ex-Governor Terry McAuliffe, cannabis stakeholders might be worried that the incoming governor will be an obstructionist for the upcoming recreational cannabis market, given that Youngkin has been vocally anti-cannabis. But Youngkin's campaign stated over the summer that he will not seek to repeal the legalization bill that was signed into law in April by the current governor, Democrat Ralph Northam, the Virginia Mercury reported. So this is a good thing and it is positive. However, what I think this is, bigger picture, this is important because it makes the Dems realize that if they lost, their seat in Virginia just now, then it's likely they're not as popular as they thought, and they're going to have to start doing some things that the American people are going to want. So it puts pressure again on the Dems to start acting if, in off-year elections, they're starting to lose some of their seats that they might have won the year before. So that's a big deal. While Sen Einhoff and other Republican senators call on Democrats to vote on the NDAA. So I just want to try to show you that the pressure is building to get something done in relation to cannabis, because both parties are agreeing something needs to get done. As Oklahoma Senator Jim Einhoff led a group of Republican senators on Tuesday in calling on Democratic leadership in the Senate to schedule a vote on the bill Einhoff says is the most important bill Congress passes each year, the NDAA. I like the sound of that. The Senate Armed Services Committee, on which Einhoff serves as the ranking member, advanced the $740 billion 2022 NDAA with strong bipartisan support in July, but it has not yet been brought to the floor for approval by the full Senate. The House Armed Services Committee moved its version of the NDAA in early September, and the full House passed it 3 weeks later. A final version of the legislation can't be crafted and voted on until the Senate approves its bill and the two versions go to conference. And this is going to be a big deal for cannabis and SAFE, right? So the major message we need to send to Senator Schumer is, I have no idea why we don't have the floor time now. It's to everyone's benefit, and it's to his benefit. So they better get going on this, which is what we as investors want to hear. While this comes from the Credit Unions National Association, safe banking remote notary should be included in the Senate NDAA. So this is the credit union also supporting this because the Senate is expected to consider the full year 2022 NDAA in the coming days. CUNA, leagues, and credit unions have strongly pushed back against any expansion to banks of the current arrangement between credit unions and the Department of Defense, while the House passed its version of the NDAA in September without the troublesome language. So what they're saying here is that the House version does not include some sort of troublesome language that would expand the current arrangement between credit unions and the Department of Defense, from my understanding. So that would make it that the Senate version does have that troublesome language. While the letter also supports the inclusion of several priorities in the Senate version of the NDAA, including the Secure and Fair Enforcement Safe Banking Act, which would provide protections to financial institutions that serve legal cannabis-based businesses. So I wanted to share that because it shows credit unions are putting pressure to get SAFE added in as well. But it's also worth noting that there are many ways Congress can get this done. And from my understanding, they go into conference and they try to make the two bills the same. And what they can end up doing is going with the Senate version, which requires 100 votes, or they can end up just going back with the House version, which would only require 60 votes. And the House version already includes SAFE, so Schumer doesn't take it out. And obviously it includes this language that the credit unions are happy with the House version as opposed to the Senate. It's possible that we can end up just going with the House version in the end. So I just wanted to share this because I thought this was interesting, but it does add to the pressure and to the fact that while the Dems are doing nothing while they're in power, support for legal cannabis continues to grow, and it's now held at a record of 68%. So I think power in 2022 is up for whichever party shows that they're going to get this done. And if the Dems don't get it done, the Republicans will get voted in, and they will. Because for the first time ever, we can see that Republicans, at least 50% of Republicans say yes to legalizing, while independents say 71% of independents say yes, and 83% of Democrats. While religious service attendants, 52% of weekly churchgoers said yes, we should legalize. 52% of nearly weekly or monthly said we should, and even less often said yes, we should. So this is a big deal because we've never been here before where cannabis is this popular, and last time I checked, the government's supposed to work for the people. They're not supposed to line their pockets at the expense of the people, so the Dems have everything to lose if they choose not to act on all of this new information. While Tim Seymour brings us this cannabis update, U.S. Senate support for sensible and passable decriminalization, which is why we saw the stock prices jump the end of Friday, cannabis investing, early innings, and long-term thematic. So just wanted to share you his perspective as well.
Let's take a look at some pot stocks. In the last hour of trading or so, they jumped in a big way. A Republican lawmaker making a move that could clear the way towards decriminalization. Our own Tim Seymour, aka #Smooth, joins us on the fast line and with more. Tim, what's going on here?
Good afternoon. So yeah, cannabis stocks first of all rallied 10% or 10 to 15% on the day, 10% in the last hour, on news that Republicans, not Democrats, are bringing a bill to outflank to counter the push of the Schumer bill, which many believe was dead on arrival. It's certainly proven to be. But again, you've got a freshman Republican senator from South Carolina, Nancy Mace, who's bringing forward something called the States Reform Act. The bottom line for the cannabis industry is we're talking about decriminalization. We're talking about keeping the power within the states to do a lot of the regulation and keeping a lot of the messiness of the federal government out of the way. It's something that is passable. It's something people didn't think was going to be passable in the short to medium term. And again, by the way, footnote to Cannabis Insider Brady Cobb, who's been on top of this and gave me a lot of this information. I just think, this is an industry that we know the growth is there, the demographics are there, the consumption trends are there, and it's spring loaded. But we reported 2 days ago, right, that the industry is under so much pressure because so many investors can't access this trade because of the federal restrictions. So again, the news today is that those federal restrictions may not be as difficult to override in the short to medium term, and that the political dynamics of Washington are also at work here. Republicans see an opportunity to steal a Democratic issue and bring a piece of legislation that would be game-changing for the industry.
Yes, game-changing at best. And this one comes from Todd Harrison, Roth on U.S. Cannabis. Cannabis state of the industry challenges remain growth story intact. And keep in mind, this was actually published and reported Friday morning before that news came out. So as cannabis industry prepares for its third quarter 2021 reporting period beginning next week, we believe three headwinds have caused our coverage to trade lower ahead of earnings. One, a strong second quarter 2021 driven by COVID-related purchasing trends has led to normalization and decelerated legal cannabis sales in third quarter of 2021. Two, legislation both on a state and federal level continues to experience delays. We expect New Jersey recreational sales to begin in early second quarter of 2022 and New York adult use licenses to now be awarded in early 2023. And three, ongoing custodial limitations have caused significant liquidity issues as banks continue to restrict U.S. cannabis-related trading and institutional investors. That was the story Friday morning. We believe investors have priced in NT weakness on muted third quarter 2021 expectations. Here's the keyword, absent of catalysts. Well, we just had our catalyst Friday afternoon. It would appear so. So, absent of catalysts, but expect sequential revenue growth from cannabis operators, which we will see next week when they release their earnings, and I will cover all those, with ongoing operational improvements scaled to drive further cash flow generation. We remain positive on the risk reward for cannabis medium term, but again, this was before we got that catalyst Friday afternoon. So that is worth noting. Thank you for sharing that, Todd. Well, the big news as well, Canopy Growth reports second quarter fiscal 2022 financial results. These were dismal, so I do want to share these, and it's worth noting that all financial information in the press release is reported in Canadian dollars unless otherwise indicated. So it also shows that Canopy needs some sort of decriminalization in the U.S. for them to pull the trigger on buying TerraSend and acreage. Otherwise, the investors are just not happy with this situation. As we go through, their net revenue is 131.4 million in Canadian dollars, which is down 3% from their net revenue last year at the same time. Their gross margins, negative 54. I don't really know how that even works. Adjusted gross margin percentage, negative 52. Net loss, negative 16.3. Adjusted EBITDA, negative 162.6. And free cash flow, negative 101.3. So when I would look at this, I would just say, this company does not deserve my money. I'm not going to invest in this company. That is just simply what I see when I look at Canopy. But I can add to the fact that I've watched Canopy since 2018 and sort of realized that they aim too high and they just went with the wrong plays, starting beverages from scratch, although they're not really a big revenue driver, different things like that sadly just has brought them to where they are now. But if we look, their business to business, Canadian recreational cannabis down 1%, business to consumer down 11%. So their brands are not doing well. So that's down 4% overall. Canadian medical cannabis down 6%, down 4%. Other international, their C3, which they paid 270 something million for this company, down 13%, while their other revenue up from 5.9 to 11.7 this recent quarter compared to last quarter, 98%. But what is that other revenue? We don't know. Global cannabis net revenue was up 1%. Storz and Bickel down 34%, which is not good because they bought them, obviously, and the whole point is to increase those sales, not decrease. This Works up 17%, BioSteel up 47%, while other down 19 and 12%. So this is just not good. And I mean, obviously there's opportunity here in the fact that Constellation Brands still is has a big stake in them. They invested a lot of money, and chances are Constellation will end up buying up Canopy in the future. But if we just look at revenue by form, we can see just more decrease. The dry bud down 11%, oils and soft gels down by 21%. Beverages did increase by 15%, edibles, topicals, and vapes, but still just such a small revenue driver. So overall down 4%. While their medical cannabis revenue did increase 10%, this was mostly driven by this massive jump in beverages and edibles topicals here. Still only grew 1% year over year, while their other consumer product revenues are down 12%. Net revenue year over year down 3%. So obviously you can go through this a lot more, but it's just there's no point because I would not want to support a company like this. Sadly, they just did all the wrong things, and that's why they are still losing the most money out of them all. So just wanted to share that because this does happen. Canopy, on top of that, shuts down Niagara facility, lays off 30 to cut costs. So it just goes to show that you can aim too big, like Canopy did, and face the consequences many years later. So very unfortunate, but it does also show how much more healthy these US MSOs are, and we're going to go through those numbers next week, so obviously stay tuned for those. But on to some news from other cannabis companies. TLRY SweetWater brand enters spirits category through new ready-to-drink cocktail now available in the US, as they announced that two of its leading brands, SweetWater Brewing Company and RIFF Cannabis, have collaborated for an executive US launch of SweetWater RIFF, SweetWater's first ready-to-drink cocktail and its inaugural entry into the spirits category. So much like Canopy and Hexo, Canadian LPs have entered the US beverage space, TLRY is doing so as well. SweetWater RIFF brings a unique twist on ready-to-drink vodka sodas in two offerings, SweetWater RIFF Citrus and SweetWater RIFF Strawberry Mule. On to this one from Verano, as they announce prime new location for Zenleaf Street, St. Charles Dispensary to enhance retail experience. So the first dispensary in Illinois to receive approval and relocate, Zenleaf St. Charles moved from its former location at a nearby business park to a prime retail space that offers improved visibility with an expanded footprint and additional parking capacity. So that should hopefully help increase foot traffic and revenues. The combined medical and adult use dispensary is now located on the high traffic retail corridor of Main Street in St. Charles, which saw average daily traffic of nearly 30,000 cars in pre-pandemic in 2019. While we move over to this from the Office of Medical Cannabis Use in Florida for this past week of November 1st to the 5th, and we see Grow Healthy did open a new location in Tampa. As we can see though, in Florida, they did add the qualified patient counts up to 635,097, which is an increase of 3,437 patients up from last week's total, which was 631,660. So they are continuing to recruit medical cannabis patients in Florida. While if we take a look, we can see the breakdown of milligrams of THC sold, milligrams of CBD sold, and milligrams of ounces of smokable flower sold. So we can see all the MSOs that are here and competing in Florida. So you can compare the amount that they sold this week to last week and keep comparing as we move forward into the coming weeks. While voters in 7 Ohio cities approved cannabis decriminalization ballot measures, with 7 others defeated. So voters in more than a dozen Ohio cities had the chance to weigh in on cannabis reform on their ballot on Tuesday, and 7 of those jurisdictions ultimately approved local measures to decriminalize cannabis. The initiative will reduce penalties for misdemeanor cannabis offenses to the lowest allowed by state law, allowing the municipalities to focus on more pressing issues with their communities, the local NORML chapter said in a press release. This new citizens law is now shared by almost 3 million residents of Ohio, with more communities already scheduled for 2022. So good job, Ohio, voting for that. At least some of your municipalities did get that. Well, onto this one for marijuana moment. Michigan governor signs bill ending medical cannabis license ban for people with past convictions. So the governor of Michigan on Thursday signed a bill that makes it so people with cannabis-related felony and misdemeanor convictions on their record are no longer disqualified from obtaining a medical cannabis business license, which makes total sense in the idea of giving back to those harmed most by the war on drugs. There's an exception for those who were convicted of distributing cannabis to a minor, but overall the legislation is meant to resolve the problem that advocates have identified, which is fair, because obviously we don't want to give it to those who were distributing to minors or doing anything that really should not be allowed, but if anyone was caught in possession, then they should be given a chance. Given that people of color are more likely to have been targets of cannabis criminalization in the past, the restrictions on participation in the industry were viewed as discriminatory. So Governor Gretchen Whitmer signed HB 4295 on Thursday, and beyond eliminating the licensing ban, the bill, sponsored by Rep. Julie Alexander, also stipulated that elected officials and employees of federally recognized tribes can obtain a state license as well. And so the legislation also clarifies that spouses of people who've applied for cannabis operating licenses are eligible to get a license as well, unless the spouse's position created a conflict of interest, was within the marijuana regulatory agency or a state and federal regulatory body making decisions regarding medical cannabis, according to the press release, while this law does take effect immediately. So good job, Michigan, giving more opportunity to those who were impacted by the war on drugs. Well, lastly, out of New York, cannabis regulators approved some new rules, some for hemp, flower sales, Delta-8 THC, and more. So although this is not, what we want to see out of the state getting the ball rolling sooner than later, they are slowly but surely making progress. As New York cannabis regulators on Wednesday approved rules for the state cannabinoid hemp program, notably clarifying that flower from the crop can be sold, but Delta-8 THC products are currently prohibited from being marketed, while hemp-infused foods and beverages will also be allowed. Now, this article is kind of all over the place, so if you want to learn more about it, you can read the article, but that's really the gist of what I found that was worth sharing. Ultimately, we want New York to get the ball rolling, but we're just waiting on New Jersey to do that first. And lastly, a report from Benzinga, cannabis is America's 5th most valuable crop, earning more for farmers than cotton and rice. So cannabis marketplace Leafly Holdings Inc. released the inaugural cannabis harvest report on Wednesday, revealing that cannabis is America's 5th most valuable crop. Think about that. And it's still federally legal. Come on. We got to change these outdated laws. The report takes the first look at cannabis data, insights, and projections across the 11 states where cannabis can currently Americans can currently purchase both adult use and medicinal cannabis. The amount makes cannabis the 5th most valuable crop in the U.S. with a wholesale harvest of $6.2 billion. America's cannabis harvest ranks above cotton and below wheat, based on U.S. Department of Agriculture data for 2020. Only corn, soybeans, hay, and wheat bring in more money to American farmers. So this is worth noting. I bet you did not know this. So please leave a like on the video if this is something that you did not know beforehand. But yes, this is a big deal and why we need to end this double standard, because America's adult use wholesale cannabis crop returned a mind-boggling $6.2 billion to farmers last year, ranking it as the 5th most valuable crop. Yet, due to federal prohibition, America does not treat cannabis farmers like farmers. They're subject to more state and federal taxes, regulations, and stigma than any other type of farmer. These barriers hurt small legacy farmers the most. This plant is helping generate wealth, employment, and community investment around the country, and our legislators need to recognize the opportunity cannabis presents for Americans today, and that is how those in power can do what the people want if they decide to act. But if they don't, the next party does plan to swoop in and do what they will not end up getting done. So I'm happy to announce that as we head into next week. I'm just excited for earnings and for the fact that we saw what happened on Friday. But this is the CUNA comp sheet from Free Cash Flow. Another great source out here, a 20-plus year institutional investor, sell-side, buy-side, and what he has done, though, is created probably one of the most in-depth, thorough comp sheets with all the U.S. MSOs, Tier 1 operators up here, Tier 2 operators up here, Tier 3 down to Tier 4, and we can see it broken down by market cap, net debt, enterprise value, stores, their fact sheet sales estimates for 2022 all the way up to 2023 with the compounded annual growth rate, FactSet EBITDA estimates 2020 to 2023, EBITDA margin from 2020 to 2023, earnings per share from 2021 to 2023, enterprise value divided by sales, enterprise value divided by EBITDA, and even price to earnings for those that like the generally accepted accounting principles. So all of this information in one amazing resource. You can grab the link below. It'll be the last of them. But I want to thank Free Cash Flow for making this free and available. Just thank you for doing that. That is what makes the internet awesome, because it allows awesome people to share their knowledge. It's a great resource that can help you learn about these companies yourself, deep dive into specifics that fit with your investing style, and allow you to take advantage, before the trend eventually changes. And if, Monday continues anything like we saw in the last 30 minutes on Friday, it's possible that that is the bottom. But I'm not going to be the one to call it. I just want to share with you that, hey, this opportunity is still here, and we might be seeing it unfold right before our eyes. And that is it for today's episode, folks. I want to thank you so much for tuning in, and I really hope you got some value out of it. What did you think of the stories mentioned? Let me know in the comments if you have any questions or concerns, and I'd be happy to address them. Besides that, if you enjoyed this video or you learned something, please just leave a like on it. Subscribe below if you don't want to miss any future videos, and I'll catch you on Wednesday for midweek update with Curaleaf's and Green Thumb's earnings. Have a great weekend, everybody.